Welcome back everyone. We're going to be talking about the Pixel 3a XL and seeing how it holds up in 2020. And I actually picked up the Pixel 3a last year, and it's funny because last year before this phone even came out, Google and their marketing team hit me up and they were like, bro, do you want to go and review this thing? We'll send it out to you for free, all this stuff. And I honestly thought it was a scam because I was like, why the heck would they send me one? But it ended up not being a scam, and a ton of people and a ton of my friends who even review stuff got their hands on one. I was so jealous, and I actually had to go to Best Buy and pick one up, which literally was so annoying. But they eventually sent me a Pixel 4 XL, which is really nice. But we're going to be looking at the phone that I should have bought last year, and it's very rare that a cheaper budget phone is better than the more expensive flagship phone. And even though this thing doesn't have a 1440p display, even though this thing really in today's standards in 2020 isn't like a crazy phone, it's still super impressive what Google was able to do. And I'm so glad they pushed out a stock Android phone that really was pretty good at the time, and it still is really decent. Now, considering the price tag of this thing, when it first came out, I think it was like $499 or maybe a little bit cheaper. I honestly don't remember. But it wasn't like a crazy expensive phone. But right now on Amazon, you can actually pick one up for about a little bit less than $300, which is a really good price to pay for a phone. However, at that price point, I would still probably recommend getting like a used Pixel 3 or Pixel 3 XL. You can even pick those ones up on Amazon for I think around the same price. So I'll leave those linked down in the description too if you want to pick those up. But either or, the Pixel 3a XL is a very decent phone in my opinion. And starting off with the build quality, on the front it actually has a 6-inch OLED display, which is extremely nice. I like, which is a 1080p, which again, I don't want to overhype it. It's good enough for the most part. It's not like a 1440p, crazy AMOLED. It's not like a Galaxy S20 display, but it's still a very good display in my opinion. The really cool thing about it is that coming from the Pixel 3 XL, you actually had to get used to not having that huge notch on the front, which was something that I really didn't like. I didn't like that notch on the Pixel 3 XL. Something like this, even though this has more bezel on it technically, it still looks overall better and much more manageable in my opinion. And I don't really care about this amount of bezel. Like, it's really not bad. The phone doesn't feel like a cheap phone though, that's the thing. It pretty much feels like a Pixel 2 XL. Maybe even a Pixel 3 XL feels like about that same distance, and it feels really nice in the hand, and the screen is very premium as well for a 1080p display. On the bottom we have a USB Type-C port. On the top we have a headphone jack, which is really cool. They kept it on this one and they brought it back, which is really funny. And on the back, single camera setup, a little bit of like this glass type of texture on the top. Maybe it is actually glass. And then the fingerprint sensor down below, and a power button on the right side, volume buttons on the right side. And in terms of the outside, that's really pretty much it. There's not a lot of craziness going on with it. It's a very good phone. It feels very good in the hand. It doesn't feel like a cheap phone at all, which is something that I really do like when I'm looking at a phone and I'm trying to keep it for a very long time. I'm not trying to get a phone for the time being and just use it for a year and keep going. I mean, that's what I'm doing now because I have to buy these phones, but like on average, I want to keep a phone for a very long time. And this is a phone that I wouldn't necessarily feel like is a cheaper phone or a budget phone, you know what I mean? So, however, there is some caveats to it. There's no IP certification on this thing, which is kind of sad. It's not an end-all be-all, but that is something that you should probably consider. It's kind of a sad thing, actually, to be honest. Also, it only has a single camera setup, which is very strange. I would expect more, but it is what it is. Also, there's no wireless charging on this thing either, which in 2020, those are some pretty big caveats. This is a pretty stripped down version of a phone, especially now in 2020. I think the software experience makes up for a lot of it, but still, those are some pretty basic things. I mean, I just reviewed the OnePlus 7 Pro the other day too, and it pretty much checks off all the boxes up until like the wireless charging and the IP certification. So this phone and the OnePlus 7 Pro have a lot in common, to be honest. So that pretty much covers it up in terms of the outside. Now, hitting on the software, this thing was released with Android Pie last year. We are able to get Android 10 on it, which is really nice. I love Android 10. I think it's one of the better versions of Android, but still, I mean, it's pretty basic and it's pretty, they haven't really made too many UI changes in a long time. Hopefully Android 11 brings that. I already have Android 11 on my Pixel 2 XL, and it seems like a pretty decent update overall. But with Android 10, I can tell you, I think it's pretty cool and it runs very well on my Pixel 3 XL. In terms of software updates, I'm pretty sure this thing is going to match the software updates as the Pixel 3 and 3a XL or the 3 XL. So considering the fact that Pixel 2 and 2 XL are getting Android 11, that means the Pixel 3 and 3 XL are probably going to stop at Android 12. So that means that this thing potentially has not only all of Android 10, but it has Android 11 coming out later this year. Then it also has Android 12 coming out next year. So this thing is going to last you for a couple more years in software support, which is really, really cool. And the fact that this thing is a Pixel phone, you can actually go and pretty much easily ROM it for your choice. You can root it and then custom ROM it after. And there's a lot of ROMs out for this thing too, which is really cool. And I would say, dude, if you have the opportunity, you should definitely root it and ROM it. It's not a necessity. It's not like you have to do it right now. But at some point, I would recommend doing it just because it's so easy to do on phones like this. Also, the fact that this thing is still supported with stock software, you can always hold out and everything. It's not like a crazy big deal or anything. So in terms of software, you're pretty much set for a majority of time that you're going to be using this phone, especially if you get it now a whole year later. You're not even probably like halfway through its life cycle, to be honest. So that really pretty much covers that up in the software standpoint. Now hitting on the performance, this thing was released with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 670 chipset, an octa-core CPU, an Adreno 615 GPU, and 4GB of RAM, which there was only one model of this phone, the 64GB model, which is, it's not a crazy amount of storage on a phone, and there's no microSD card slot on this phone either, so that kind of furthers the claim of how much of a budget phone this is. I'll give you an example though. My 11 Pro that I have is the 64GB model, and I paid like $1,000, over $1,000 for that phone, and this phone costs less than $300, so this is still a pretty good priced phone, to be honest. Now, in terms of the performance, I think it handles, everything I really pretty much threw at it fine. Because it's stock software, it doesn't have a lot of background process going around it. And I've always noticed this, even when I used my Nexus 4 when I owned it, I noticed that when I compared it to a lot of the newer Android phones, it seemed like the newer phones were probably a little bit faster, but my Nexus 4 was smoother. And I can say the same thing about my Pixel 3 XL. It's not like a crazy fast phone, but it's a pretty smooth phone overall, and I think a lot of people really do appreciate phones like the Pixel 3 and the 3A XL because it brings such a budget phone, but also brings that stock software. And before, we usually had to pay a premium for it, or we had to custom ROM our phone. And because we have the capability of doing that, not only do we get the features of stock Android and the simplicity of it, but we also get that performance boost. In my opinion, there is kind of a performance boost. If Google were to just push better hardware in these phones, like a 8GB of RAM or the Qualcomm Snapdragon 865 next year or this year, whatever, I feel like these phones will get much, much faster. But I think where it stands right now, it's a pretty good performing phone for the most part. However, if you start going up to like that top tier type of performance and you want to start pushing like crazy apps and putting a bunch of apps in the background and all that stuff, that's where you might start seeing some issues. Because this phone only has 4GB of RAM, that's not an extremely high amount of RAM to have in a phone, to be honest. So I could totally see a ton of people potentially being complaining about a bunch of apps crashing in the background. And that's really my biggest downside of the Pixel lineup, is because of the amount of RAM that are in these phones. The Pixel 3 and 3 XL also had 4GB of RAM, so it's very weird that Google weren't, they weren't necessarily pushing storage like crazy or pushing RAM like crazy either. But ultimately what I can tell you is performance. For a budget phone, it's still pretty good. But for a phone in 2020, especially when we have phones like the Galaxy S10 that costs about like $100 more than this thing, it kind of makes you think about whether you should pick this one up or picking up another phone that might be a little bit more expensive in order to use that phone for the better performance. So I give it like a 7.5 out of 10 in 2020 standards. Now hitting on the camera, this thing has a 12.2 megapixel camera on the back. It is a single camera setup, and you can do 4K at 30, no 4K at 60 or anything, no 8K like we can on the Galaxy S20, which is okay. It has optical image stabilization and all that stuff, but it's a pretty basic camera. It's not a dual camera setup, it's not a triple camera setup, nothing like that, which is probably the more sadder aspects of this thing, because in 2020 we have so many phones that have multiple camera lenses, and even if the quality of that one camera lens is really good, some people might prefer having the better camera features, so being able to zoom in more or being able to get that ultra wide setup. And in a phone like this, you only have one capability, and that's the decent photos, the really good, this thing takes pretty good photos, but still at that, I feel like the camera hardware features are something that, is a must have in 2020. On the front end, 8 megapixel setup, and we can shoot 1080p videos on that. And ultimately what I can tell you is, in terms of the camera setup on this thing, is that this thing takes pretty good photos. It's just kind of, watered down with the lack of camera hardware features. So hopefully with the Pixel 4a XL, if they're going to release that this year, hopefully they actually go and push out some more camera hardware features into their devices. That's a must have, and hopefully they actually do that this year. So in terms of the camera, I give it a thumbs up for the time being, but this thing is going to be short-lived because of the lack of telephoto lens or ultra-wide sensors, to be honest. Now ending it off with the battery life, this thing has a 3700 mAh battery, which is actually really, really good. And that's a really good battery life to have on a phone like this. Like I said before, it's stock software, so there's not a lot of things going on in the background. And on top of that, It's a 1080p display. It is a pretty big display, but it's not a crazy 1440p super bright display you have to push all over. Like, it's a very good powered phone, and it's a very good software phone, and the battery life of this thing is actually very good as well, even now in 2020. The one I have is a used one, and this battery hasn't even degraded that much either. I think it's still at like 94% or 95%, which is kind of a lot, but for the most part, that's actually pretty decent in my opinion. So to kind of sum up the video and to answer the question, is the Pixel 3a XL still worth it in 2020? I will say yes, completely. It's still worth it in 2020. It has so much life left in it. However, there are some things about this phone that really kind of rub me the wrong way. The lack of wireless charging, the lack of IP certification, the lack of an extra camera lens or two, and the fact that there's only one storage model. Those things kind of rub me the wrong way, but they might not rub you the wrong way. So I would recommend picking it up. But if you want to go top tier a little bit more, pick up the Pixel 3 XL or the Pixel 3. And I will even throw in a Galaxy S10 in there just because I like that phone a lot. So all 4 of those phones will be linked down in the description below. You can get them from there and help support the channel at the same time. That's pretty much it. If you guys have any other questions or you own the Pixel 3 XL, let me know your experience down in the comment section below. The like button helps me so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count. I just dropped my Pixel 3 XL. Check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my second channel. All those links are linked down below. I'd really appreciate if you guys could check it out. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.